It's April 5th, 2019. Holly Barlow-Austin, age 46, is brought into the Bi-State Justice Center in Texarkana, Texas, for violating the terms of her probation. No one has any way of knowing it, but Holly is going to end up serving a much harsher sentence than anyone could likely ever imagine. That's because after about 2 short months at the Justice Center in Bowie County, Holly, at that point, age 47, will be pronounced dead. The CCTV footage you're about to watch documents Holly's final, tortured 48 hours spent in what LaSalle Corrections, the private owners of the jail, refer to as a medical observation cell. Please remember that some of this footage is going to be hard to watch and that viewer discretion is therefore advised.
Today's date is June 7th, 2019. The time is currently 1:37. We're located at Medical Op 3 with Ms. Barlow. Ms. Barlow, do you want to go to see the doctor?
No.
At this time, the offender has stated she does not want to go see the doctor.
No, that'll never do nothing.
Ma'am?
That'll never do nothing.
Okay. At this time, the time is 13:38. We're going to secure the camera.
As stated before, the clip you just saw was filmed at the very start of what would be Holly's final 48 hours on the floor of her putrefied cell at a corrupt jail in Bowie County, Texas. As we can see from the very get-go, Holly doesn't appear to be feeling her best. She's lying there among what looks like garbage strewn around the cell, on a nasty floor that at least looks like it hadn't seen a mop since the day the cell was built. Important to note is that Holly isn't lying in bed simply to pass the time, as boring as I imagine it is. Holly is not known to be the lazy type, or the type to complain for no reason. Those who know her well would probably find this version of Holly unrecognizable. In other words, this isn't a bid for attention. Something is definitely wrong, and yet, here we watch as a staff member makes this recording presumably to document Holly denying that she wants to be seen by a doctor in the event that things should take a turn for the worse. What's ironic is that during her time here, Holly has all but begged to be seen. She has not only asked for assistance verbally, but she's put in numerous official written requests for medical help. These requests have cited concerning symptoms that include but are not limited to dizziness, loss of appetite, excruciating headaches, and the inability to stand. It's said that these requests for help have either gone ignored or else, pretty much as Holly is heard saying herself, when she does get seen, they quote-unquote never do anything. As defeated and sad as the situation seems now, it only gets worse from here. As you'll see, for the next several days, Holly will be left in this cell. Most of the time, she's observed being left alone, but on occasion, people will come and go. Employees occasionally take notice of her declining health, but ultimately choose to do nothing. Oh, and just FYI, while this footage doesn't have any sound to it, you probably don't need to hear much to see that something isn't right. In the beginning, we notice Holly just seems to be fidgeting around as the time ticks slowly by. It's impossible to tell what Holly's restlessness may be from, whether she maybe can't get comfortable as the result of a medical issue, or else perhaps this is just due to the naturally and intentionally uncomfortable quality of the jail cell itself. One thing that is perhaps more important to note, however, is that in all of her first 12 hours spent inside this cell, Holly has not brought anything to eat or drink that we are able to observe. In fact, a complaint filed by her family later on will allege precisely that for 12 hours, Holly was deprived of water. It doesn't take medical training to know that this is an unacceptable amount of time for a person to go without water. Finally, we are able to see that the staff, at last, gets around to bringing her some. Did everybody manage to catch that just now? In these last frames we looked at, it appears as if Holly is actually feeling around for something, which ends up being her cup of water. Keep in mind that this is along the lines of how Holly appeared on the day she checked into the facility. So why does it now appear as if Holly has lost her vision? The cell is obviously well lit, and the guards seem to have no problem seeing just fine. The fact that Holly seems to be suffering from an onset of some degree of blindness is something that most people would react to. And yet, as soon as she clumsily manages to locate her water cup and take a drink, the staff member seems to quickly dart out of her way, and the two workers you see on the camera both seem in a hurry to leave, just as soon as they make sure to lock up the cell. Yet again, Holly is left completely alone. Just to make sure that everybody is clear on this one aspect, Holly was in what appeared to be good physical shape upon entering the LaSalle Corrections run facility. Now, just about 10 weeks later, she is blind. That's only one of a multitude of new symptoms she's been experiencing. The fact that no one, not even the jail's own medical staff, is showing the slightest bit of concern over this development is, in itself, enough to send chills up one's spine. Who are these cruel and heartless individuals that make up the staff of the Bi-State Justice Center, and what has happened to their humanity? On June 10th, we can see how a team of individuals, including a licensed vocational nurse, come in to take a look at Holly. During this quick visit, Holly's vitals are surprisingly taken, but then at the same time, you've got to wonder, what was the point? Because when her blood pressure is recorded at 177/123, her resting heart rate documented at 130 beats per minute. Yet again, no one bats an eye. Just so it is clear, Holly's blood pressure and her heart rate, especially when resting, are both unusually, if not alarmingly, high. This, along with the fact she cannot see and that she lacks the ability to stand on her own, should have had the staff acting quickly to obtain emergency treatment for Holly. Instead, once again, they do nothing. Instead, we can see as the team leaves the cell just as calmly as they entered. At the risk of stating the obvious, no one sends for help. In the late hours of June 10th, Holly can be seen strangely almost crab-walking around her cell, or scooting herself around the floor without really much purpose at all. Knowing that whatever Holly is sick with has managed to affect her vision, we can't help but wonder if other areas of her brain haven't already been adversely affected as well. I think that something should probably also be said about Holly's outer appearance. She seems to be sporting a more emaciated frame with each passing day. Likewise, her legs appear to be atrophied. All in all, it should be clear to anyone watching that this woman's behavior and movements are not quite normal, and anyone at the jail should have been able to see it by this point, not only those who are medically trained. Quite remarkably, at one point, an employee of the jail was heard accusing Holly of faking her symptoms. Such an accusation is so heinous that in the spirit of sparing you a rant of mammoth proportions, I won't even begin to remark on this one beyond simply stating how incredibly disgusted I am. It should be more than obvious to any 5-year-old that this patient is in need of some critical assistance, especially since it is known that she did not come in looking this way. And, even on the off chance that this patient had spent the last month or so actually faking these symptoms without once breaking character, so-called medical professionals should always know that in such cases they need to err on the side of caution. Get the patient help. If it turns out she was faking it, what have you really lost? On the other hand, if it turns out it wasn't an act, and the patient dies as a result, then the same could obviously not be said, as the loss would be immeasurable. The fact that anybody could observe Holly, or any human being, in this kind of a state, do nothing about it, and then go home at night and actually sleep, should make us all at least a little bit concerned as with regard to the question of what kind of horrible people walk among us. For the duration of this video, Holly can be seen moving around her cell, unable to find a proper position in which to achieve any semblance of decent rest. She never does seem to remain in any one position comfortably for more than 10 seconds or so. We can also only guess as to her state of mind, as well as to what other various aches and pains she might be being forced to endure. Finally, as the footage now shows, two staff members enter Holly's cell with a wheelchair and they manage to lift her up and onto the chair without much trouble. It's nearly impossible not to notice how frail Holly appears at this point, her body looking very ragdoll-like. Following this moment, Holly is moved to a nearby hospital. The date of this transfer is June 11, 2019. Astonishingly, no one in Holly's family is informed about her transfer from the jail. Nobody has any idea that she's in the hospital, much less do they know about the horrendous condition that she is in. A few days later, on June 15th, when Holly's husband shows up at the jail for his regularly scheduled visit, he is stunned to be told by staffers that Holly isn't there. Even more unbelievable was the jail's refusal to disclose Holly's whereabouts to anybody. It is only after calling the sheriff's station that any of Holly's relatives finally are able to learn of where she had been taken, and even that had not proven easy. Michael Glenn Austin, that is Holly's husband, recalls rushing to the nearby Texarkana hospital right away, only to discover Holly not just totally unrecognizable, but also literally clinging to life. In a teary televised interview, he describes having been overwhelmed by the feeling that Holly had been holding on as hard as she could, waiting to see her family one final time before finally letting go. Because surely enough, after she and her loved ones had said their goodbyes in a manner of speaking, it was only a few more hours before Holly's agony would finally end. There, at the hospital, on June 17, 2019, at the age of 47, Holly Barlow-Austin was pronounced dead. Holly's cause of death was officially listed as sepsis, as well as fungal meningitis and accelerated hypertension. Also complicating the situation was the fact that, at the time, Holly had also been learning to live with a potentially life-threatening diagnosis, HIV. Despite living with such a serious illness, she had been, up until entering the Bi-State Justice Center, living pretty well. Perhaps the only catch was the fact that her immune system did rely on a certain prescribed medication she needed to take daily. But this should have, under normal circumstances, not proven itself to be a problem, even behind bars. As records would later divulge, the jail knew of Holly's illness, and they knew that her life literally depended on her taking said medication. Furthermore, they had Holly's medication available on hand. Her husband knew this for a fact because it was he who had hand-delivered a fresh prescription of Holly's meds to the jail himself, just shortly upon her incarceration and the discovery that she would be kept at the facility in what's known as pretrial detention. Astonishingly enough, even though they were equipped with everything they needed to ensure Holly's well-being, the Justice Center would ultimately drop the ball, and they would do so in more ways than one. If there's one thing that a person quickly learns, if they decide to look into the life of Holly Barlow-Austin, it's that she loved her family and her family loved her. Wanting nothing but even a shred of justice for Holly, Holly's mother and her husband together would file a lawsuit in federal court against Bowie County, LaSalle Corrections, and a handful of LaSalle's employees at the Texarkana jail where Holly had been housed. In its broadest terms, the suit alleged that the defendants had caused Holly's death. According to the Times record, the lawsuit stated that, quote, LaSalle guards and medical staff neglected her health care, falsified records to cover their failure to check on her, and ignored obvious signs that her condition was worsening. The staff furthermore failed to provide her prescribed medication, deprived her of food and water, and only took her to the hospital after it was too late. End quote. And that still wasn't all. According to the complaint, Holly had begun to fall ill following days of having not received her prescribed medication. And it was after this point that, left untreated, the symptoms would only continue to systematically worsen and pile up. As previously mentioned, said symptoms included everything from dizziness to loss of eyesight. Stunning is that when tests came back showing that Holly's immune system was failing, employees still only sat idly by, doing absolutely nothing. Michael would himself recall that during one of his visits with Holly in the month of April, He had noticed that she appeared to be squinting at him. He also recalled her lamenting over the belief that they weren't providing her with her meds as prescribed. Since she continued to go without proper treatment, her condition would worsen until at some point in the middle of May, she was placed on quote-unquote medical observation. This was where Holly was in the CCTV footage shown in this video. Clearly, being put on medical observation still meant receiving no treatment, but also virtually no observation, and in Holly's case, it meant being deprived of food and water too. The Times record states that in the hours of surveillance video around which our own story is centered around, Holly can be seen, quote-unquote, growing sicker, writhing in pain, and calling for help. They go on to reiterate much of what we already saw. Quote, over a period of days, guards and medical staff didn't check on her or, when they did, ignored her calls for help and water, end quote. And of course, a case like this is hardly ever complete without one more utterly sickening act, and that is the act of falsifying observation logs, which apparently is another terrible thing the jail did. If you recall that in our footage, on the 10th of June, we observed a nurse and 2 other individuals enter Holly's cell, finally, so that they could check up on her. It is stated that they decided to allow Holly to go to the hospital after they noticed her pupils had stopped reacting to light. Given the rest of the context they had to work with, a medical professional should have figured that this was symptomatic of something very urgent, and yet it still wouldn't be until the next day that finally Holly would be wheeled away in that wheelchair. By then, it would be too late. Holly was beyond the point of recovery. We know this more or less for the fact that after being brought into the hospital, she didn't recover. One of the last things the lawsuit touched on was the jail's refusal to let family know where Holly was following the day of that transfer. The complaint even adds that after the family found out anyway, the jail still made further attempts to try and prevent them from seeing her. The lawsuit would be settled with the Barlow-Austin family being rewarded a sum of $7 million, and as the family's attorney would perhaps rightfully boast, quote, this was the largest known settlement over a jail-related death in state history, end quote. Before we wrap up this installment, there's just one more thing that this story wouldn't be complete without mentioning. And perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by now, but it turns out that what happened to Holly is not an isolated incident. 2 months before Holly's death, for example, LaSalle reached another settlement in another lawsuit for an undisclosed amount. The suit had been filed by the family of a man named Michael Sabby, who had also died while under the care of the jail, albeit in 2015. Sabby's complaint, like Holly's, alleged that LaSalle employees had deprived him of the medications and treatment he needed for his heart disease and diabetes, primarily.
The following video, taken hours before he died, may be disturbing to watch.
Surveillance video given to CBS News from Michael Sabby's attorney appears to show a security guard at the Bi-State Justice Center throw Sabby to the ground. According to the lawsuit, Sabby wasn't feeling well and had stopped to lean against the wall before attempting to enter the booking area to make a phone call. A second video, taken by a jail employee, purportedly shows what happened after Sabby is on the floor. He's held down by 6 guards and pepper sprayed, brought to a jail nurse for less than a minute, rinsed off, and returned to his cell. During the 9.5-minute video, Sabby says he can't breathe at least 19 times and asks for water.
Oh, please, water, please.
The next morning, jail guards found the 35-year-old dead on his jail cell floor.
So he reported at intake that he had hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and asthma.
Eric Hype is representing Sabby's family in a lawsuit against the jail filed earlier this week. The suit claims jail staff didn't give Sabby his medications, ignored his labored breathing, and used excessive force.
Sadly, the list of victims allegedly goes on. In the end, this all naturally begs the question, if this private corporation is so corrupt, if these jails have a pattern of neglecting to provide medical care to their inmates, and there is a pattern of inmates turning up mysteriously dead in their care, then where are the criminal charges? Why aren't there any investigations being conducted? This is a very good question, in fact. And to answer that question, let's just have a quick look at the controversial question of why Holly's death was never investigated. Any time that an in-custody death occurs in any Texas correctional facility, by law, that must be reported, and then subsequently it must be criminally investigated. In Holly's case, recall that, in spite of numerous requests for help, and in spite of the obviously foul condition she was in, jail employees waited until she was very near the brink of death to finally take her to the hospital. Then once she was at the hospital, recall that the jail staff tried all they could to ensure that Mike, the husband, did not find out her whereabouts. When Mike found out anyway, days after she'd already been languishing away in the ER, he says he arrived to discover Holly being in the horrid condition she was, of course, but also that guards from LaSalle Corrections had been presiding over her and over the whole situation for nearly 4 days. And, it said, within hours of Mike and Holly's mother's arrival at the hospital, a paper was presented to them. The paper stated that Holly was officially released from jail custody. As we also know, within the next 12 hours, she was dead. Much to the shock of Holly's mother and husband, there would be no criminal investigation into the matter because, according to that paper, which had fluttered in after being signed by the sheriff at nearly the last minute, that one single bloody signature from the county sheriff absolved them of all and any would-be responsibility in the death of Holly Barlow-Austin. Because how could the jail be responsible for a person's death if the person wasn't even in their custody at the time? And for anyone hoping to give this institution the benefit of the doubt, this was absolutely no accident on their part. In fact, by now it appears they were becoming rather skilled at using this particular loophole in order to avoid accountability for their actions. In 2011, for example, a man by the name of Ivan Earl Allen was found collapsed on the floor of his cell at one of LaSalle's numerous other facilities. Staff immediately ushered him away to the hospital. The state of Texas conducts a mandatory criminal investigation any time a person dies in custody, yet there would be no investigation into Ivan's death. And this was due to the fact that after being found unresponsive and being scooted off to the hospital, a suspiciously similar paper surfaced that stated Ivan had been released from the prison's care. Therefore, by law, no investigation could be conducted. In the case of Holly Barlow-Austin, if it seemed at all strange, as for why the workers at the Bi-State Justice Center had been so adamant that she not be seen by family members, it starts to make a little more sense when we frame it against these other new findings. If you think about the fact that at that time, Holly had not yet been signed out of the jail's custody, one of two things is likely to be the most possible explanation for everything. Either the jail were actively trying to obtain a signed release and had been buying time in order to do so, or else they were uncertain as to whether she might still be able to recover, and thus they were keeping guard over her bedside to monitor her progress. And in the event that things should take a turn for the worse, they would be able to send for their little paper to be signed over right away. Except that, when the family laid eyes on the damaged and deplorable condition that Holly was in upon their arrival to the ER, LaSalle knew at once that an investigation would need to be avoided, given how obvious it would be to the family that Holly had not deteriorated to her current state in the time she'd spent under care of the hospital. Hence the arrival of the release only hours upon the family's arrival to see her. Had the family never been able to pin down her location, and then had Holly died, even in the face of an investigation, it may have been a bit easier to deny that Holly was in any form of seriously concerning shape upon being transferred to the hospital. On the other hand, had Holly somehow managed to make a miraculous comeback? Had she already been released from the jail? That fact right there may have raised a few eyebrows, with the question as to why. Either way, at the end of the day, it appears rather cut and dry. The guards presiding over her were merely waiting for Holly to die. Upon signs of obvious irreversible death, they would obtain their release and not be held responsible. This, it is said to have been uncovered, is the game that LaSalle Corrections has been playing for quite some time now. Except, as is often the case with corrupt, high-powered institutions, even those above them tend to either turn a blind eye or downright accept the wrongdoing and work to steer the public's attention in another direction. In spite of outcries from inmates, from family members, from the community, and even from the media, in spite of independent investigations and the discovery of some pretty damning evidence of wrongdoing, and, in spite of numerous lawsuits and costly settlements. LaSalle Corrections somehow continues to dodge any form of corrective action being taken against them. To wit, Bowie County's top official, Judge Bobby Howell, at the time of the lawsuit pertaining to Holly's in-custody death, had publicly stated no comment with regard to the pending litigation. However, he did take the opportunity to praise LaSalle Corrections for a job well done on keeping COVID out of their jails. I think now we know why there has not been any real justice pertaining to these inmates' deaths at the hands of LaSalle-run facilities. Judge Howell's statement is very telling, and in fact, it's also rather chilling. In a manner of speaking, we can now see the ceiling that keeps being hit any time justice is pursued on any higher or significant level.
Why'd y'all wait so long to take her to the hospital?
I can't comment on that death in custody.
Last month, we went to Austin to a jail commission meeting. LaSalle Executive Jay Easton was there. So was Bowie County Sheriff James Prince. She was in the hospital in critical condition and she's released. You're not going to say anything, Sheriff?
No, ma'am, I'm not.
I love it. That's too sweet.
Well, guys, as I'm sure you know, all good things must come to an end, and unfortunately, it's no different with this video. The good news is that if you enjoyed this content, and true crime stories in general, you can always hit like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I'm also always interested in hearing your thoughts. Just remember to keep the discussion respectful of everyone. In closing, I can't wait to see you back for the next video and, as always, stay safe.